Thank you, Peter. Yes. Thank you very much. We're going to move now into the next session. There are some times when you're reading something you think it's just a page turner. This is kind of like a conference page turner. I think if anyone would agree that the time spent here today is well worth it. I will ask those people engaged in conversation now to take it outside. Paul and others, thank you very much. And I'm going to now introduce in a moment our next panel. So this is the final stretch of today's meeting. I also want to mention, while we're making this quick transition, just in terms of the spirit of bringing other resources, James Fallows, our chairman, is good friends with a gentleman named Gabriel Wyman of the University of Haifa. Can I ask everyone to hold the conversation, please? I don't want to yell over you. Gabby Wyman was at the U.S. Institute of Peace. He co-wrote recently a piece in the New York Times Magazine with Daniel Benjamin, and he is also one of the world's great experts on following not just al-Qaeda on the internet, but many terrorist organizations on the internet. So if you Google Gabby Wyman, you can find out more about this, or go to the New America Foundation website, www.newamerica.net, and you can find several of the papers that Wyman did, or more recently in the New York Times Magazine with Daniel Benjamin on this. It's a good resource to really look at the contemporary use of the internet by not only transnational terrorism out of the Middle East, but elsewhere. Aum Shinrikyo in Japan and many other places, Jamal Islamiyah in Southeast Asia, etc. It's a fascinating and important piece of work. I want to thank all of. So I am now going to introduce the moderator of our next panel for our final program, entitled "The Real Twin Towers, Al-Qaeda and Its Influence on Pakistan and Saudi Arabia," which I'm sure will continue the page-turner nature. Anatol Lieven, who is the author of "America, Right or Wrong? An Anatomy of American Nationalism," which I highly recommend to you, and Carney, is on his way. I want to let Arif know he will be here. You can still introduce him. He'll just go last, if you don't mind. Let me say a few words about my friend Arif Lalani. Arif is director. He's one of these other people, kind of like Ursula Mueller. He happens to work for another government, but we don't bring people in because they have a government role or government. He happens to be one of the best doing what he does, and we would take him if he were an independent freelancer. Arif Lalani is currently director for the South Asia Division at the Department of Foreign Affairs and International Trade in Canada. He's responsible for managing relations with Afghanistan, Bangladesh, Bhutan, the Maldives, India, Pakistan, Nepal, and Sri Lanka. From 2000 to 2003, he was a local. He lived here in Washington, D.C., and was responsible for really managing anti-terror coordination between Canada and the United States. Previous to that, he served in the United Nations Security Council as Canada's alternative representative. He is a fascinating and important and extremely knowledgeable person about many of the networks and people and parts of the world that we've been talking about. So without further ado, please welcome Arif Lalani.
Thanks very much, Steve. Listen, it's late in the day, and I think we all really want to get to the last topic, so let me try and get to it as quickly as possible. I think it's fitting that we're ending with a focus on something concrete, back to the ground in terms of Pakistan and Saudi Arabia. We've spent most of the day talking about issues across the globe, transnational issues, theories, trends. But at the end of the day, what matters, in fact, is what is happening on the ground. And the question before us, al-Qaeda's influence on Pakistan and Saudi Arabia, in some ways could be reworded to say, how successful has the campaign against al-Qaeda been? Because to answer the question of what is al-Qaeda's influence at the moment in places like Pakistan and Saudi Arabia is really to answer that question about everything we've been discussing today. And I think to help us discuss that, we have two and soon to be three experts on the topic. Let me start by introducing Hamid Mir, who is the bureau chief and anchor for Geo Television in Pakistan, an independent private commercial television network run by the Jung News Group, which is the largest news group in Pakistan. And having just come from Pakistan last week, I can attest to the fact that Hamid also runs one of the most popular television talk shows in Pakistan called Capital Talk, modeled somewhat after the Sunday talk shows here. Hamid also has the distinction of being, I think, probably the last journalist to have interviewed bin Laden in November of 2001. He also has a forthcoming book out, a biography on Osama bin Laden. Lawrence Wright, many of you will know as the staff writer from The New Yorker, with an eclectic track record in writing of some 6 books ranging from subjects having to do with inner city poverty to religious leaders, and of course also to the subject of bin Laden and al-Qaeda. He has a forthcoming book out on the events that led to the events of 9/11. A portion of that book was excerpted in The New Yorker as the man behind bin Laden, and it won the Overseas Press Club's award for Best Magazine Reporting. Anatol Lieven, who in this town certainly needs no introduction, he has a long career in academia and in journalism. He's currently the senior analyst for the Carnegie Endowment for International Peace, and author of his most recent book, America, Right or Wrong, a study of American nationalism. And in his long career, one of the areas that he has served in was as the correspondent for the Times in both Pakistan and Afghanistan. So he also comes with a long history in the region. With that, let me ask Hamid to lead off our discussion.
Thank you, Arif. First of all, I must praise your patience. All of you are sitting here from this morning, and which shows your interest and seriousness, and also the importance of this subject. And I think that the organizers of this conference are very successful. They have generated a lot of interest. And before coming on the subject, I want to share something with you that some days ago, a Pakistani newspaper published a story about this conference. And that story was filed by Mr. Khalid Hassan, who is a very senior and well-respected journalist based in Washington. I never read that story because on that day I was in the tribal area where Pakistan army is fighting against al-Qaeda. So in the evening when I came back, I received a call on my cell phone, and somebody was threatening me that he abused me, and he said, "You are going to Washington and there is a big conspiracy hatched against us in Washington, and Peter Bergen and you are going to speak against us, and if you are going there, you will be ready to face the consequences." So I was, you see, I'm used to, and I never took it seriously. But after 2 days, when I was on the Islamabad airport, my flight was cancelled due to bad weather. And I came back to my home, and I just sent an email to Peter Bergen and his colleagues that the flight is cancelled and I think it's difficult to come to Washington. But that night when I went to the bed, I was thinking about this conference, and I realized I was just thinking that if I don't go to that conference, the people who threatened me, who called me, they will be very happy that the Hamid Mir is a very obedient journalist. We just make a phone call, I threatened him, and he is not going, and they will be very happy. So I decided that they should not be happy. And I tried my best to catch flights from Islamabad to London and London to Washington, and late night I am here. And after attending this conference, I think that they will not be very happy. So I think this is the first ever serious effort I have seen in the United States of America that you people want to understand al-Qaeda. And I have learned a lot. I appreciate most of the views expressed here. I have a difference of opinion with some of the people, especially One very well-respected speaker said that al-Qaeda is no more a dangerous organization, and they have lost their operational capacity, their operational ability. So I think that if it is dead, if al-Qaeda is dead, then why hundreds of Pakistani soldiers have lost their lives in just last 6 months in the tribal areas of Pakistan? And if al-Qaeda is dead, then why Ayman al-Zawahiri criticized George W. Bush and Pervez Musharraf in his latest video message? Because he's angry and he knows that they are after us and we are after them. So I think that al-Qaeda is still a threat, and we should not commit this blunder to underestimate al-Qaeda at that time. Don't underestimate al-Qaeda. I think that many people underestimated the al-Qaeda threat, and that's why 9/11 happened. And nobody can understand al-Qaeda without understanding the situation in Pakistan and Saudi Arabia. Pakistan is the only Muslim country which was created in the name of Islam and is the only nuclear power in the Islamic world. And Saudi Arabia is the center of Muslim holy lands and the biggest, the largest oil producer. And these two countries played a vital role in war against Soviet Union from 1979 to 1989. And these two countries are at the moment allies of United States of America. But these two countries played a vital role in war against Soviet Union from 1979 to 89. But they came into international focus after 9/11 because 15 out of 19 attackers of 9/11 were from Saudi Arabia. And all the important leaders of al-Qaeda were arrested from Pakistan after 9/11. So that's why I think that these two countries are very important, and for understanding al-Qaeda, you have to understand the situation in these two countries. Al-Qaeda was created in Pakistan, on Pakistani soil, in 1988, and bin Laden was the person who created al-Qaeda in the city of Peshawar. And at that time, Osama bin Laden wanted to use Pakistan as the base camp for an international jihad, because jihad against Soviet Union was over, but he wanted to start a new kind of jihad. Pakistan was the country which was used as a launching pad against the Soviet Union by US, and Osama bin Laden wanted to use that launching pad against Israel after 1989. He tried to destabilize the democratically elected government of Benazir Bhutto through money, and very few people knows it, that some Pakistani politicians who were rivals of Benazir Bhutto, they got big amount of money from Osama bin Laden. But thanks God, they were wise enough that they were not ready to cooperate with him politically. They just got the money and used that money against the government, and that's all, digested that money. And Osama bin Laden still, whenever I interviewed him, he expressed his displeasure over the attitude of those Pakistani politicians who got money, and that's all. They never used that money for his objectives. It was August 1990 when Saddam Hussein attacked Kuwait, and Osama bin Laden tried to exploit that opportunity for reorganizing his fighters in Saudi Arabia, and he approached the Saudi government and volunteered to mobilize veterans of the 1979 to 1989 Afghan jihad against Soviet occupation to defend Saudi Arabia against Iraq. The Saudi government declined his offer, preferring to rely instead on the US-led coalition assembled by President George W. Bush Sr. And that was the time when Osama bin Laden started speaking against Americans openly. That was the first time he started speaking openly, and resented the presence of the infidel troops on the Holy Lands. And it was And then he left Saudi Arabia, he went to Sudan, and then he came back to Afghanistan in May 1996. And you must understand that when Osama bin Laden came back to Afghanistan in May 1996, Kabul was not controlled by Taliban. Kabul was controlled by Mr. Rabbani, who is now an ally of Mr. Hamid Karzai, which means that he is the ally of President Bush and President Musharraf. So it was October 1996 when I wrote a critical column about the Taliban policies, and some Saudis reacted on my column, and they contacted me in Islamabad, came back to me, and they protested, and they said that the Radio Tehran is using your column for defaming Taliban and for defaming us. And you are playing in the hands of the Iranians. And they explained their position. So I said that why you are closing down the girls' schools in Afghanistan. And I also asked a question that why on the other side some Pakistani officials and the US officials, they are supporting you. That was my question to them. And they said, okay, we will prove that we are not playing any game of the Pakistani establishment or the US establishment. You must come to Kandahar and you meet Mullah Umar, our leader, and then you can realize the situation. So I went to Kandahar in December 1996. I met Mullah Umar just for 30 minutes because it was very difficult to understand his Pashto language. But I still remember that Mullah Umar told me that if I am an American agent, why I have given refuge to Osama bin Laden. So I asked him, where is he? And he said he's in Afghanistan. So Peter Bergen can understand the dirty tactics of journalists. So I said, oh, I am not ready to believe you. If he's here, please set up my meeting with him. So that's how Mullah Umar set up my first meeting with Osama bin Laden in 1997. And I interviewed him. And there is a very interesting thing that interview got a full-page coverage in my newspaper, and it was not a big hit. My chief editor asked me why you have wasted so much time and space for a person who is not known in Pakistan, and the newspaper is not sell very well in the market. So you can understand that in 1997 he was nobody. And my first interview with him was a flop interview. He only confessed the killing of the American and Pakistani soldiers in Somalia, and he spoke against the presence of the American troops in Saudi Arabia, and that's all. The people of Pakistan were not aware about bin Laden. He started getting a lot of coverage in Western media in early 1998 when he issued an edict to kill Americans. And in 1998, I interviewed him second time in Kandahar. This time I confronted him for hours about his edict in the light of Islamic teachings, and I disagree with one of the speakers who claimed here that he has a lot of Quranic knowledge. I am also not a religious scholar. I don't have command on the Islamic law. But when I confronted him, I asked him a simple question. Convince me, how can you justify the killing of the innocent non-Muslims in the light of Islamic teachings? You have issued a fatwa, you have issued a statement that kill the Americans. How can you justify through Quran? He took 5 hours. He was trying to convince me. And you see, I was tired. I was making notes and changing my cassettes again and again. And after 5 hours, I said, you cannot make your point. So then he asked the help from Dr. Amanu Zawari. He said, you can convince him. And he then started speaking me in English language. And after the lunch. Then they invited me to another meeting where Osama bin Laden was delivering a speech to 50 to 60 boys. And in that speech, I noticed that he is not talking religion, he is talking politics. He's trying to exploit the situation in Middle East. He's trying to exploit the situation in Bosnia, in Chechnya, in Kashmir. So that's why I think that he is not representative of a religion. I realized it in 1998 because when he talks about religion in front of some young boys, I cannot see motivation, I cannot see big slogans, nothing, because he cannot convince them because his case is very weak. But when he talks politics, suddenly there is a lot of motivation among the angry youth, angry boys, and they raise the slogans, Allahu Akbar, we are ready to die. So this is politics, and he is doing that politics in the name of religion. And it was May 1998 when I interviewed him. And after that interview, he invited me. He said that I am going to address a press conference and I am going to make a very important announcement. And after some weeks, somebody contacted me, but you see, I thought that this is a very dangerous game. And now he is going to address a press conference with more than a dozen journalists. And at that time, I thought that Americans are very smart and they may bomb his press conference. So I decided not to attend that press conference, and I missed that press conference. And there was no problem in that press conference. More than 20 journalists belonging to different international organizations, including some US organizations, they attended that press conference. Only myself and Peter Bergen were missing. So, and I was fearing that somebody will attack that press conference, but the attacks took place in Kenya and Tanzania. After some days of that press conference, he announced the establishment of International Islamic Front in that press conference. And after the attacks in Kenya and Tanzania, that place was bombed where he addressed a press conference. The place was bombed after many, many weeks. And he escaped. So, in next few years, I visited Afghanistan again and again, and I came to know that al-Qaeda have set up training camps in eastern and southern Afghanistan and providing training to thousands of Arabs, Pakistanis, Afghanis, Bengalis, Indonesian, Malaysians, Turks, African Americans. I have met at least 2 African Americans in his hideouts, speaking excellent English in American accent. And Muslims of different parts of this world. And the training of al-Qaeda, many people mix up Taliban with al-Qaeda. The training of al-Qaeda was different from Taliban. Al-Qaeda trained its fighters for urban war, while Taliban trained their fighters for guerrilla war in the mountains, hit and run. The motive was very clear, that al-Qaeda was planning to organize big attacks against US interests in the big cities. And they were also trying to organize an armed revolt in Saudi Arabia to overthrow the kingdom. And one recently captured Pakistani operator of al-Qaeda, Qari Saifullah Akhtar, who was arrested in Dubai. He was part of an armed revolt and a conspiracy which was unearthed in 1995, in which some high-ranking Pakistan army officers were also arrested and they were convicted. And he was part of that conspiracy also. So it is proved that al-Qaeda is trying to organize some kind of organized armed coups with the help of some army officers, not only in Saudi Arabia but also in Pakistan. And when I visited Afghanistan in 2001, in November 2001, I spent at least 3 days in al-Qaeda network. They blindfolded me, transferring me from one hideout to another hideout. And according to my information, which I obtained from the different al-Qaeda sources at that time, I'm talking about 2001, they told me, and they were making it sure that I should not publish that information. They were just sharing it, while in a conversation, a clever journalist can get that kind of information. And they were telling me that more than 3,500 trained al-Qaeda fighters left Afghanistan between July and October 2001. Out of those 3,500 fighters, 1,500 were sent to Saudi Arabia and rest of them to Europe and America with different passports and different names. Most of them used Italian, Portuguese, Dutch and Japanese passports with Christian and Jewish names. And Pakistan was not a target of al-Qaeda before 9/11. Change in Pakistani policy after 9/11 was a great surprise for al-Qaeda leadership. Pakistan banned some terrorist organizations just 3 weeks before the 9/11 attacks, but al-Qaeda was not expecting a big U-turn in Pakistani policy towards Afghanistan. When I interviewed Osama bin Laden in Afghanistan third time in November 2001, he mainly criticized President Musharraf and asked people of Pakistan to overthrow his government. Dr. Emanu Zawahiri expressed hope that there would be a coup in Pakistan army against Musharraf, but his hope never materialized. No doubt that thousands of people came out on the roads in all the big cities of Pakistan against US when Afghanistan was attacked, but Musharraf played India card very cleverly. And he gave an impression that I am cooperating with USA to avoid a possible alliance between India and USA against Pakistan. But after spending that difficult times, next 2 years, he explained to people of Pakistan that we are not fighting that war for US, we are fighting that for in our interest. Because terrorism is not good for US, terrorism is not good for Pakistan, so that's why we are fighting that war. And in next 1 year, Pakistan became target of al-Qaeda terrorism in which dozens of innocent Muslims were killed. But Musharraf regime never faced any major political threat from anti-American religious parties. It was the general election of October 2002 in which the six parties religious alliance played anti-American card openly and got majority in 2 out of 4 provinces of Pakistan, which are bordering Afghanistan. It was proved that a big silent part of Pakistani population is not happy with US and Musharraf. The leaders and voters of the religious alliance never supported al-Qaeda openly, but some of them had meetings with Osama bin Laden and Mullah Umar in the past, and they never criticized al-Qaeda directly like Musharraf. President Musharraf used military power against al-Qaeda in tribal areas and still using the military power in the tribal areas. And in last 1 year, it is proved that these al-Qaeda militants and some of their leaders, they were not fighting a just war. Now it is proved to the population of the tribal areas, because the Pakistan army have arrested some children, some Tajik and Uzbek children, 12-year-old children, 14-year-old children, who were imported from Afghanistan, and al-Qaeda was using those small children for suicide attacks and for organizing remote control bomb explosions against Pakistan army. So when those children were presented in front of the media, it was a big surprise for the Pakistani people that how can these champions of Islam can use a 12-year-old kid for their fight against Pakistan army. But on the other hand, we have to admit that the Musharraf regime is not very successful. He has very successfully launched many operations against al-Qaeda. He tried his best to break the backbone of al-Qaeda in the tribal areas. But there is no, you see, a political motivation against his war against terrorism in Pakistan, because he has not engaged the moderate and liberal political parties in Pakistan. A lot of opposition is going on between President Musharraf and the liberal and moderate political parties. So this is one of the points which have to be addressed by President Musharraf, and he is trying. But on the other hand, I must say that he is trying his best to overcome the problem. And I must say that the governments in Pakistan and Saudi Arabia are two new twin towers for al-Qaeda. Al-Qaeda is striking again and again on these towers to destroy them, because these two countries have created a lot of problems for al-Qaeda. In Pakistan, Pervez Musharraf is trying his best to eradicate al-Qaeda from the Pakistani society. He has introduced the idea of enlightened moderation. And in Saudi Arabia, the Saudi regime is also trying their best, but I don't think that they are very successful, because many speakers have expressed their views here. The Saudi regime is not very popular. They need to introduce some kind of political reforms. And when Osama bin Laden criticized Saudi regime, I have spoken to many Saudi youngsters when I visited Saudi Arabia recently. They are very happy. They said, we don't know what is the problem between bin Laden and Bush. We are not bothered about Bush. We are very happy that he is criticizing our leaders, because they have not given us democracy, they have not given us freedom of expression, and that's why we are happy with bin Laden, because he is exposing them. So their thinking is different. They are not supporting Osama bin Laden because he is fighting against George Bush. They are supporting Osama bin Laden because he is fighting against some corrupt regimes, some dictators in the Middle East. And I must say that if US is not ready to withdraw its support for these kind of corrupt regimes, you cannot address this problem properly. And this is one of the root causes. Osama bin Laden is a hero for many disgruntled Muslims, not because of a religion, but due to some political issues. If these issues are not resolved on the basis of justice, the world will become a more dangerous place to live in the future. Thank you.
Thanks very much, Hamid. I might just welcome Anatol Lieven, who has been able to join us, so thank you very much. I might ask Lawrence to make his presentation, and then we'll invite Anatol.
Boy, you guys really sat through a long day. Thanks for sticking it out. My job is to talk a little bit about the effect of al-Qaeda and all this on Saudi Arabia, a country that I spent 3 months in last year teaching young journalists at this newspaper called the Saudi Gazette. You know, when I was a boy, I went to visit my cousins in Kansas on this family farm, and one of my cousins said, have you ever hypnotized a chicken? And I'm a city slicker, and I said, well, no, I don't think that's possible. And he said, well, come here, I'll show you. So chickens like to roost up on top of the roof of the barn, as I learned. And we climbed up on top of the barn and snuck up on the chickens. And my cousin grabbed one of the chickens, and he stuck its head under its wing, and then he whirled it around 10 or 15 times. And then he very carefully set it back down on the edge of the roof. And it was the strangest thing. The chicken just sat there for the longest time. And the reason that I bring this up is that sometimes the existence of Saudi Arabia in the modern world reminds me a little of that hypnotized chicken. It's unlikely It's improbable, it's unnatural, but there it is. So it's an incredible anachronism, single-family rule in this day and time, a family that not only runs the country but essentially owns it, that has, according to Saudi economists I spoke to, stolen 30 to 40% of its vast natural wealth. A country where even very minor princes in this enormous family, Al Saud, allow themselves to build $40 million palaces, and where they've set a standard for debauchery around the world that will probably never be equaled. This at a time when poverty in the kingdom is increasing and the disparity of income, of wealth is so noticeable. There are a lot of troubling trends in the kingdom. Prince Al-Walid bin Talal says that the majority of Saudis weren't even born during the 1991 Gulf War. Well, like most statistics in Saudi Arabia, it's anecdotal, probably made up, and may be true or not. There are no reliable statistics in a country that hypothesizes all of their information. So when we come to a question like joblessness, maybe it's 8 or 9%, as it is officially said, or maybe it's more like 30 or 40%. But nobody in either one of those camps takes into account the partial quality of that employment, the underemployment of the Saudis who even have jobs, nor does it take into account the women who even the government admits 95% of them are unemployed, even though women in Saudi Arabia have more college degrees and more advanced degrees at every level of education than the men do. They comprise perhaps the most qualified pool of unemployed labor in the world. So joblessness, youth, is a dangerous combination in any society. And they mount up, especially in Saudi Arabia, to boredom. Let me describe what life is like in Saudi Arabia, especially for young people like my reporters. There's no music, there are no movies, there are no plays, there's no theater, there are very few parks. There's one significant museum and I went to in Riyadh, and there was only one other family going through the museum at the time that I was there. It has a very impoverished literature, very impoverished art. There's no political life. There are no parties. There are no unions. There is nothing between the government and the mosque. All that entire space that we call civil society doesn't exist. In the form of entertainment in Jeddah, it has the world's largest Chuck E. Cheese pizza parlor. Recently in Jeddah, the IKEA furniture store opened its first branch, and it was such a thrilling event that 15,000 people showed up, and 2 people were trampled to death. One of my reporters did a story about a survey that was done at King Abdulaziz University in Jeddah about depression. And all my reporters were so depressed. Some of them couldn't sleep at night. They bit their nails down to the nubs. But this was a scientific survey of 2,000 students in Saudi Arabia. 65% of the boys and 72% of the girls showed symptoms of depression. 7% of the girls had attempted suicide, admitted that they had attempted suicide. 5% of both sexes admitted to chronic drug use and alcoholism. This in a kingdom where alcohol is strictly forbidden. And I can tell you, it's very difficult to get a drink in the Kingdom of Saudi Arabia, so one has to appreciate how stark those figures are. One of the political facts of Saudi Arabia is that there are a lot of young, idle, bored young men, and made worse by the fact that the separation of sexes has gotten more extreme than it was in the past. And so these young men are unsocialized. They're unexposed to the civilizing influence of the female sex and the companionship and solace that that kind of relationship provides. So let's add up all of these elements, each one so dangerous by itself. And any political scientist would say Saudi Arabia is overripe for revolution, especially when you consider and throw in the religious fanaticism that has long been a part of the culture. The pressures for explosive, total change in the kingdom seem irresistible. But still, the hypnotized chicken stands on the barnyard roofs, unmoved by the predictions of journalists and social scientists. Why? What force is greater than the anger, the despair, the frustration, the hopelessness that everywhere else in the world have led to revolutions, coups, and civil wars, but in Saudi Arabia have resulted in a kind of social coma that justifies my tortured metaphor of the hypnotized chicken? Fear is that force. I'm not speaking exactly of the fear of the government. Saudis don't fear their government, although they hate it. Their government is not nearly as cruel to its citizens or its subjects, to use the correct word, as, for instance, Egypt is. What they fear is the alternative. So let's look at Saudi Arabia from the point of view of the chicken. How did it come to be hypnotized? The unification of Saudi Arabia in the 1920s and 30s was a far bloodier event than most Saudi historians have allowed themselves to say. I'll give you an example. The city of Taif was the gateway to the conquest of the kingdom of Hijaz. And the city surrendered to King Abdulaziz's shock troops, who were known as the Ikhwan. They were a precursor of modern-day al-Qaeda in many ways, and they believed in purifying the peninsula of any kind of extraneous elements. So the city surrendered, and the Ikhwan entered the gates of the city and found every able-bodied man they could find, cut him to pieces, and threw him down into the well. Eventually, this group turned on their sponsor, King Abdulaziz, and he only subdued them with the help of the British RAF bombers. So there's a fear internalized among most Saudis that I know that this fanaticism that is so indigenous will be unleashed again. And even worse, in their opinion, the country will devolve into tribal warfare. Al-Saud represents a bulwark in their minds against total chaos. And this is true even in the minds of a lot of liberal reformers that I talk to. Why would that be true? Well, if you look at the neighborhood that the Saudis live in, and you look around at where revolutions have taken place, at Egypt, where you have this enduring autocracy that's far less liberal than the monarchy it replaced. You look at Iran, which produced the mullahs. You look at Iraq, where Saddam Hussein came to power. You look at Somalia, where you have tribal chaos. You would say to yourself that change does not necessarily equal progress. It's often said that the Saudis are conservative and slow to change. But I think when I hear that about Mohammed Shukani, who was my editor at the Saudi Gazette, a man about my age, Muhammad was born in Asir in the southern part of Saudi Arabia, where many of the hijackers came from. And like many Assyri boys, he was a shepherd. He wore flowers in his hair. He didn't see an automobile until he was 10 years old, when he moved to Jeddah. Eventually he got a scholarship and he went to the University of Texas and got a degree in comparative literature and became a professor at King Abdulaziz and the editor of this paper. His life encompasses all the technical and social change the world has endured since the Industrial Revolution. It's worth keeping in mind when we talk about Saudi Arabia and change, that it's changed more rapidly perhaps than any other society. So what would wake the chicken? In real life, to wake a hypnotized chicken, you push him off the barn. His wings open up, his head comes out, he finds himself in midair, and that's how you wake a chicken. Now, can al-Qaeda push the chicken off the barn? No, I don't believe it. Because the fear of fanaticism and social chaos, these are the greatest friends al-Saud has. And bin Laden, who calls for the overthrow of the royal family, paradoxically helps keep them in power. And so do we. Because it's my theory that the chicken is not really hypnotized. He's standing there with his head under his wing, thinking, if I don't do anything, I won't get whirled around anymore. If you want the chicken to wake from his fearful slumber, you have to provide him a positive model for social change. And that's where Iraq becomes so important to Saudi Arabia and to other countries in the region. But for now, Iraq embodies exactly what the Saudis fear the most: chaos, tribal warfare, a descent into barbarism. So my forecast is the same as Lubna Alayan, that wonderful Saudi businesswoman who capsulized the Saudi idea of governance: reform without change. In other words, the chicken stays hypnotized. Thank you.
Thank you very much indeed. I wanted to say a few words about Pakistan and Afghanistan, which are to some extent, of course, one complex of problems. And then, if there's time, to go on to say a little about the nature of al-Qaeda and its allies. I must say, I thought that was a brilliant analogy or metaphor, the hypnotized chicken. I wouldn't say that Pakistan is a hypnotized chicken. It is a pretty depressed chicken. And you could say that it has a lot to be depressed about. In the case of Pakistan, I think that the first thing you have to understand about people's attitudes and people's political behavior, and the very considerable degree today of political apathy in most of Pakistan, is the fact that so many different models over the past two generations, or really in many ways since the creation of the Pakistani state, have failed. Pakistan has experienced periods of what you might call developmental dictatorship, particularly under Ayub Khan. It experienced a period of quasi-democratic, or at least pseudo-democratic, socialist, populist development under Bhutto. It experienced a not very extreme, but still rhetorically quite extreme, Islamist military authoritarian rule under Zia in the 1980s, and then, actually both in the 1950s and in the 70s, and then again in the 1990s, it experienced several periods of, what was supposed to be democratic rule by democratic political parties. And as far as the mass of the population is concerned, they have seen, at least relatively, compared to other countries, very little out of any of this. Sorry, am I not...
Just make sure the mic is real close.
Right. Sorry about that. this has been dramatized more recently by the fact that whereas previously Pakistan was at least growing economically faster than India, which is the most important index in Pakistan itself, of course, for relative development. In recent years, even that has failed, and Pakistan began to grow at a markedly lower rate than India after India itself moved to more free market economics from the late 1980s on. And so there is a feeling that a very wide range of different regimes, different approaches have all failed. Now, from the point of view of democratization, the most important period at present is, of course, the 1990s, where two periods of the rule of the Pakistan People's Party under Benazir Bhutto and two periods of rule by, well, whatever you really want to call them. They called themselves a kind of Islamist party. But they were, in fact, a kind of conservative alliance of urban bosses and businessmen and rural landowners with links to the military. And admittedly with a lot of military help, but also with tremendous help from their own, internal failings. Each of these periods came to an end really in a welter of corruption and mismanagement. Now, one hears a lot, particularly in America, about America's responsibility for this, America's responsibility for backing Zia in the 1980s, America's responsibility for not backing Pakistan in the 1990s, and particularly not backing Benazir Bhutto. And now you sometimes hear that America today is in some sense responsible for Musharraf's mildly authoritarian rule and for the continued dominance of the military in Pakistan. Now, there is a certain amount of truth in this, but I think it can be exaggerated. The phrase in Pakistan is admittedly that the country is governed by the three A's, Allah, Army, and America. But it's also worth pointing out that America is the third of these, not the first. America could have done much more over the years. In particular, I think the way in which America walked away from Pakistan, and even more strikingly Afghanistan, after the Soviet expulsion from Afghanistan, was extremely negative. But I think in Pakistan, but also more widely in the Muslim world, there are considerable dangers in this line that it all comes back to America. Because it encourages a kind of narcissism here, which places all the emphasis on American decisions, American will. What if we only want it strongly enough, things will happen. If one looks at the failure of democracy in Pakistan in the past, I think any serious analysis has to begin with the nature of Pakistani society and the Pakistani economy, and the failure of that economy, that society, to generate modern mass political parties. The PPP is the most striking example of that. Benazir Bhutto once told me that the Pakistan People's Party was a Scandinavian-type social democratic party. Since I had a considerable regard for self-preservation and I was a very, very junior journalist, I didn't reply that I entirely agreed a Scandinavian-type social democratic party of the type of Sweden in 1000 AD. But that is what the PPP to a very great extent is. I mean, or rather, not really Sweden in 1000 AD, but maybe somewhere a bit later in the Middle Ages. It is a coalition of big landowners. Feudal is a mistaken term, but their ancestors at least were in many cases feudal. And like their equivalents in many other parts of the world, Philippines would be one example, they employ populism as a means of extending their own power, of gaining control of government. They do have aspects of secularism, certain aspects of secularism, because given the class they come from, they tend to come from more westernized backgrounds, sometimes originally from a British background. But in terms of a serious socio-economic program, they have never displayed that, actually, in practice, at least not since Zulfikar Ali Bhutto in the 1970s, and that frankly turned into a disaster, because it became completely mixed up with the looting of the state, as it did indeed become under his daughter. You are not going to get democratic development in Pakistan until you have mass political parties with a serious modernizing agenda. And in my view, you're not going to get mass political parties until you have a very different kind of society in Pakistan. Now, that may well grow up over time, but it is not something that we can create, you know, with the flash of a wand. And at present, it must be said that in many ways the most effective genuine mass political parties today in Pakistan, or to a degree the only ones, are one ethnic party in Karachi, the MQM, representing the Mahajir minority of people who originally emigrated from India. And the second is the Islamists, to some extent, or at least the Jamaat, who are the best organized and also to some degree the most moderate of the Islamist alliance. So I would just enter a very strong caution, which I think we also heard with regard to Saudi Arabia to some extent, against the view that we should push the chickens off the roof and that they will then learn to fly and fly in a democratic manner. I don't think that in most cases that is so. We must also be very cautious, I think, of when people there blame America, and I must say, since, as you will have gathered, I'm not from here, Britain as well, and the British record in the Middle East is even worse than the American in this regard. But when people blame us for having supported and still supporting corrupt authoritarian regimes in the past and present, we need to ask the second question, which is, does that mean that you would favor direct interventions by us, much stronger interventions to change your government, to shape your society? Now, if you read, for example, the latest Zogby poll from the Middle East, which very much asks this question, the answer in the vast majority of cases is no. Our past record does not lead to a demand for us radically to change our policy. It only leads to distrust of whatever we do. Distrust of our motives, whatever we do. The feeling that whatever policy we pursue, whatever we say, will not be motivated by idealism, or genuine concern for the well-being of these countries, but that there will be other agendas behind it, cynical agendas of American interest or Israeli interest, or in the case of the Pakistanis, at least paranoid Pakistanis, even Indian interest. So, my own view is that when it comes to the promotion of democracy, this, if it is to lead to the results that we would wish, which in the long run, of course, is stable, successful democratic states. Well, I have to say, in my view, that to create such states, and I think Pakistan is the classic example of this, it actually needs to be preceded by long periods of socio-economic transformation with very strong elements, both of developmentalism, of course, but also of redistribution. Something which one does not see very much of in the present Greater Middle East Initiative, for example. That brings me very briefly to the nature of our radical Islamist enemies. Because clearly, on the one hand, in some ways, like the communists before them, there are two main strains in their popular appeal in different parts of the Muslim world. The first is that of social revolution or social radicalism. They obviously appeal enormously to sentiments stemming from socioeconomic, not necessarily exactly deprivation, but certainly absence of opportunity, as we've so often heard, among educated youth in particular. And on the other, there is the aspect of, well, you could call it in some cases nationalist resentment or ethnic resentment or geopolitical resentment. In different communisms, there were often all these aspects at one and the same time. There were local ethnic and national resentments. There were wider geopolitical resentments against the US. On On the first, it seems to me that as far as the Sunni Islamists are concerned, their appeal, I mean, for them, this aspect of their appeal is an ambiguous one, and it can serve us in some ways. Because in a vague sense, it does appeal to very large numbers of Muslims. But on the other hand, when they actually set out their whole agenda and plan for society, people have a tendency, I mean, even pretty conservative Muslims have a tendency to run away. In the case of Afghanistan, in the Afghan urban population, I mean, even in the Pashtun areas, of course, deeply conservative, but they really did not like the kind of rigid totalitarian rule that the Taliban came and clapped on them. In the countryside, it was rather different, because the countryside had always pursued its own ways, irrespective of what governments said anyway. So it wasn't as if the Taliban was actually making much difference one way or another. But in the towns, even among a lot of conservatives, there was this feeling that a form of Islam had been clapped on us, which actually did not correspond even to our conservative Islamic traditions. And that, of course, is because, to a very considerable extent, the kind of Islam represented by al-Qaeda is modernist. I mean, it's a modern creation. I mean, of course, it's on extremely ancient roots, and of course, this reflects patterns in Islam which were analysed by Ibn Khaldun, among many others, 700 years ago. But nonetheless, in its specific form, it is both modern, and of course, it is alien. It does come to a very considerable extent from outside most of the Muslim countries where it's being applied. So, although as I say, we have to be very cautious as to our levels of interventionism in these societies. I think al-Qaeda and its allies, because of course, as we all know, the world of Sunni Islamist extremism is not an organization, it's a web or net with different nodes. But they also are facing many challenges in appealing to the mass of the population. When it comes to their nationalist or geopolitical appeal, unfortunately, this is often very much stronger. And we have seen how different nodes or groups in this web have been able to infiltrate and colonize ethnic resentments really across the Muslim world. From the southern Philippines, we now see very strongly in southern Thailand how local resentments are being given an Islamist shape by these people who come in. We've seen it in Chechnya, we see it in Palestine to a considerable extent, and of course in Kashmir. And it seems to me that this, to some extent, also reflects something that we saw during the Cold War, which is that there were all these rebellions, these movements which came up for local reasons, which took on the form of communism, which called themselves communist or socialist liberation movements. We saw that when the world appeal of communism faded, at the end of the Cold War, in so many parts of Africa and Latin America as well, these movements or these whole states immediately renamed themselves, abandoned the whole communist thing, adopted a completely different ideology. So it does seem to me that although on the one hand this ability of al-Qaeda and its allies to colonize these movements is very menacing. I mean, it is what gives them their greatest force. I mean, makes them of the greatest danger to the West and other countries as well. This may in some ways prove a shallow appeal if we can find a way to actually appease or reduce the ethnic and national resentments which they have succeeded in colonizing. Thank you.
Thanks very much. Thanks to all three of our panelists. And I think we have probably about 10 or 15 minutes for questions. And while people come, 10, while people come to the microphone, let me just start it off by saying it seems that maybe two of you, to stick to our analogy, seem to have answered the chicken and egg question in terms of, I think what comes first, and if you disagree, it would be interesting to have your views, but it seems that in both Pakistan and Saudi Arabia, what you seem to be saying, in fact, is that you have extremism because the societies, in fact, are dysfunctional in terms of good governance and economic development. And it's those vulnerable societies that are incubating extremists. And if that's the case, ought that not to be just as important a plank in the campaign against terrorism and al-Qaeda as the military so-called hard end? Why don't I ask the three of you that to start with? I don't know if there's
yes, I would entirely agree with that. I think that the development of these societies is just as critical as was the development of a number of societies during the Cold War. What perturbs me, I must say, well, there are obviously many things that perturb me. One of which is that you know, the countries concerned, and Pakistan once again is a leading example, may be much less capable of successful development than some of the societies that we dealt with in the Cold War. But it does also seem to me that the effort in terms of economic development that the US is putting into this is very, very much less, for example, than the effort we put into supporting and developing South Korea or Taiwan or Thailand or Malaysia during the Cold War. And now, when I say that, I'm not advocating simply pouring large amounts of money into these places, much of which will be stolen, although I think, you know, that there has to be a certain amount of transfer. But one of the most important aspects during the Cold War was the question of American openness to trade. You know, deliberately geopolitically driven openness to the exports of these countries. Now, the Greater Middle East Initiative is accompanied by some very useful moves in this regard, you know, free trade agreements with a number of Middle Eastern countries. But I have to say that so far they have been very much with the smaller countries, and the results have been on a relatively small scale. So I would like to see precisely the Greater Middle East Initiative accompanied, frankly, by much more of the you know, the conscious commitment to socio-economic development that we did see during aspects of the Cold War.
Lawrence, if you...
When I was in Saudi Arabia, I had the Can you hear me all right? I had the opportunity last year to interview the American ambassador at the time, and I said, you know, by the way, as an American, I'm a little sick of having to defend the fact that we're always supporting these autocratic regimes. You know, I mean, can't we be promoting, you know, American values and projecting values as much as we project American power all around the world? And he said, well, you know, we don't really want to have democracy here right now. You know, we are in a position where if they had an election, the Islamists would win. They've got a lot of money. They have a defense agreement with Pakistan. We don't want Saudi Arabia run by a bunch of people who hate America and might bomb us. Well, that's an argument, you know. Right after I got back, where Bush changed his policy and his ambassador, and he now, you know, is espousing more work in the vineyards of democracy in the Middle East. Yet the ambassador's caution is not, you know, is worth taking into account. You know, you do also need to prepare the civil society. It's very difficult to imagine the creation of a democracy in a country that doesn't have any other supporting institutions. So I think there's a whole lot of work to be done before we can imagine a functioning self-regulating democracy in Saudi Arabia and a number of other countries there.
Thanks. Hamid, maybe a brief response, because I'm very aware we need to get to the questions.
Yes, brief response. I think the real democracy is the only solution to this growing transnational terrorism. And I want to make this point very clearly, that whether it is Saudi Arabia or Pakistan, the United States of America have always supported dictators. First dictator in Pakistan, General Ayub Khan, was supported by United States. He was a liberal man. Second dictator, General Ziaul Haq, was Islamist. He was supported by United States. And the third one, is also supported by United States. The first ever democratically elected Prime Minister of Pakistan, which was Zulfikar Ali Bhutto, when his government was toppled by Ziaul Haq, he was a progressive man. He was fighting against the Islamic extremists, and the Pakistan army, with the collision of some corrupt judges, they hanged him because he was against the mullahs. And the same mullahs then became allies of United States of America and Pakistan army, and all of them created bin Laden. So I'm not ready to agree with some of those who says that Pakistanis are not fit for democracy. Pakistanis are very much fit for democracy. Pakistan is the creation of a democratic process. The founder of Pakistan was a clean-shaved, liberal and democratic man. But unfortunately, you imposed dictators on us.
I'm very quickly going to ask for 2 questions in a row from here and let our panelists answer them in the interest of trying to get through all of the questions. So, and please keep it to questions.
Mark Santos, Terrorism Research Center. My question is for Hamid Mir. I have a question about the western provinces of Pakistan, such as Balochistan, Waziristan, Northwest Frontier Province. I was wondering about the extent to which the people in those tribal areas support al-Qaeda or Taliban remnants that have fled to there.
Yes, very good question. This is a reality.
Just go through the questions in succession. That'll allow us to get through them.
My name's Randy Cook. I'm curious if the commentators could comment briefly upon continuing involvement in possible complicity between the Saudi and Pakistani governments with the al-Qaeda networks or with terrorist networks, specifically in relation to the Khan network and continuing relationships between Pakistani Secret Service agents and al-Qaeda, and then also with Saudi contributions to Wahhabi types of ideologies. Thank you.
Please. The first question is a very important question. Nobody can deny this fact that the majority of the population in the tribal area of Pakistan, they are very much supportive for al-Qaeda because they are Pashtuns and they are illiterate. This area was not open for Pakistani authorities. The British Army tried their best to capture that area for 80 years, but they were not able to control or capture that area. This is the first time in the history of that area that any army has established some checkposts in the whole area. And the Pakistan army is fighting a very complicated war in that area because they are facing not only the local tribals, but they are facing fighters from Uzbekistan, from Tajikistan, from Chechnya, and all of them are united there against Pakistan army, and the population is supportive to them. So there is a need that people like you, the people like Peter Bergen and the Western journalists, the American journalists, you must visit that area. Then you can understand the ground reality and you can understand that why bin Laden is surviving. Because this area, what I want to make the point is that there is a need to open up the area for you people. You come to that area and you can get the answers of your questions that why this area is still a safe haven for al-Qaeda.
Very quickly on the continuing contribution through Saudi Arabia to insurgents or al-Qaeda. Saudi Arabia has undertaken a number of reforms having to do with its charities. It's been an extremely sensitive subject. It has made progress, but Saudi intelligence admitted to me that a lot of this money is going to the insurgency in Iraq, and it's being laundered through Jordan and Syria mainly.
As far as Pakistan is concerned, I don't believe that there is any connection now between the Pakistani government as such and al-Qaida or other terrorist groups, because after all, these terrorist groups have twice tried to assassinate Musharraf and also to blow up the corps commander in Karachi, amongst other attacks within Pakistan. On the other hand, I always remember in 2002, I was talking to a senior Pakistani police officer, and he said that when he received the order, or when he received information leading him to plan an operation to try to capture either al-Qaeda people within Pakistan or leading Islamist terrorists from some other group, he said he kept the planning of that operation within a circle of 2 or at most 3 people until the last possible moment, until the moment when the police actually more or less left the door and set out, because he was very well aware that the police force, including middle-ranking officers, was thoroughly infiltrated by sympathizers with extremists.
I want to apologize to Arif Lalani and the panelists, not to cut things off, but I have to ask, because of commitment we have with the broadcasters, that the next 3 people make your question within 15 seconds or less. Pick one of the various comments. We just do not have time. And I would ask the 3 respondents to make your last word as brief as possible, because we must end. I've got to invite someone to make some closing comments, but we've got to end in the next few minutes. Thank you.
My question, Kamran Bukhari, is strategic forecasting. My question is to Hamid Mir, and anybody else can answer it too. What are your thoughts on the perception that al-Qaeda's new headquarters are in Pakistan? Why is it difficult to, penetrate the upper echelons of the organization? And your thoughts on the penetration, or the level of penetration, of the Pakistani security and intelligence apparatus? Thanks.
Thanks. We'll take the next 2, and then you can have your final comment.
My name is Khalid Hassan, correspondent of Daily Times Lahore in Washington. My question is to Hamid Mir. The view in Washington among academics and among officials is that while Musharraf has performed creditably against al-Qaeda, there is, as far as the Taliban are concerned, they are alive and well and living in Pakistan. So your comments. And for Mr. Wright, it is the fate of most chickens to end up in the pot. And as our great national poet Muhammad Iqbal said, that the only permanence in life is change. So how do you think change will come to Saudi Arabia?
Thanks. Last question.
Hélène Dutart from the Moroccan Embassy. My question is regarding the Saudi opposition in London. What are the chances to win some elections and to de-hypnotize the chickens?
Thanks very much. I'm going to limit you really to 30 seconds each.
30 seconds. Briefly, the new al-Qaeda military operational chief, Saiful Adil, he is not based in Pakistan. He is, according to my information, he's issuing directions while sitting in Iran, creating problems for Pakistan and Saudi Arabia. And Mr. Khalid Hassan have asked me a question about the relationship between Pakistan and Taliban. Yes, there is a difference between al-Qaeda and Taliban. Taliban still enjoy a lot of respect and popularity in some tribal areas and also in the Pashtun-speaking areas of Pakistan. But there is a fact that all those pro-al-Qaeda militants who were killed in Pakistan and who participated in assassination attempts against President Musharraf, they were actually part of al-Qaeda. They were actually part of Taliban, not al-Qaeda. So now President Musharraf have realized that the Pakistani chapter of Taliban is al-Qaeda. There is no difference between al-Qaeda and Taliban in Pakistan. But definitely in Afghanistan, al-Qaeda and Taliban are 2 different things.
Larry, last 30 seconds.
Change will come to Saudi Arabia. It can't stop it. The men who run Saudi Arabia have been in power since before electricity. They dye their beards, but nobody denies the fact that change is stalking them. And as for women, they've been shut out of the municipal elections. It's a tragedy, but they are voting in small things, like in the Jeddah Chamber of Commerce and stuff like that. They're setting certain precedents, so one can only hope, but I don't have much hope for anything immediate.
Anatol.
far as the Taliban and al-Qaida in Pakistan are concerned, well, as we've heard, they're largely in the Pashtun tribal areas, which, as we've also heard, the British attempted to conquer and rule directly, and then, after a number of, shall we say, unfortunate experiences, decided that they had to rule indirectly and essentially let the Pashtuns run themselves. That is a very problematic and unsatisfactory situation, but it may be the best that we and the Pakistanis can actually hope for.
Thank you. Thank you, gentlemen.
If I can ask you to remain in your seats for a moment, I'm going to invite Karen Greenberg of the Center on Law and Security at NYU, New York University, and Peter Bergen to come immediately to the podium. We're going to share a few concluding. If I can ask the panel to stay right where you are. No, we'll just enjoy each other for just 3 more minutes, and ask Peter and Karen to say a few concluding words. Thank you very much.
So if you ever want to have a really good party, plan a conference with Peter and Steve. Really, that's really my conclusion. No, what I really want to say is that Steve did a lot of work for this conference, and he's complimented Peter, and he's complimented me, and he's complimented everybody else. But really, he put this conference together. He did all the things Peter and I didn't want to do. And although Peter did wonderful things from places in Afghanistan that we don't really want to know about, it was Steve that had to really carry the ball through a lot of the thicker and thinner times. And having said that and made him look like sort of a logistical master, which he is, I also want to say that Steve has been spending the last, I don't know how much of his time, working on this Washington Note. I don't know if any of you know it, the WashingtonNote.com, which is a blog that he created that really out of nothing has become one of the more attended to blogs around and was very important prior to the election. And I would feel remiss if I didn't say that you should check it out when you leave here. And Peter will make the final comment.
Well, thank you very much for coming today. Obviously, I'm going to be very brief. We've heard a lot. I want to thank Jenny Bumpman, who basically did so much of the logistics. I want to thank Karen. I want to thank Steve. I also want to thank Hamid Mir, who came from Islamabad, and Arif Lalani, who came from Ottawa. And I think you win the distance prize in the United States from Austin. I won't thank people who came from Virginia or Washington, but I will thank Yosri Fuda, who came from London, and also Paul Edel, who came from London, and Rohan Kutnaratne, where are you? He's already left, who came from Singapore. So thank you very much, and anybody who actually survived this marathon, I don't know what you get, but a gold star maybe. Thank you.
Thank you all. We'll be back with a provocative conference soon. Thank you.